up beside him, blaring beside Merle. He said, "There's still some good in this world." He said that Hag was a poet for the common man. Got him through his tour in Vietnam. He was the first dance to a brown-eyed girl.
Hello and welcome to Telling It Like It Is, UGA Extensions in Southeast Georgia's newest source for local and biased research-based information about Georgia's #1 industry, agriculture. If you're new to the pod, my name is Blake Carter, Effingham County A&R agent, and with me as always, I have my co-host Savannah Tanner, the Emmanuel County A&R agent. Before we get started today, I do want to just say that our hearts and thoughts and prayers are with those that have been affected by all the storms recently. And growers, I know it's been a tough year, but just keep persevering like y'all have always done. There will be right now we don't really know a whole lot of information whether it's too early to tell what's going to happen or what kind of programs or support we're going to get. But I know there's a lot out there, so reach out to either your local extension office to talk to your agent, your FSA office, RMA, or Farm Bureau with the Weathered But Strong program that they're doing. I will say I'm very impressed with all the organizations and state support that we're getting from our Commissioner of Agriculture, Tyler Harper, and and Governor Kemp as well. And I know Savannah will echo that as well. But like I said, we just wanted to just say those things before we get started. But today, switching gears to a little bit more of a lighter topic, it's getting to the time of year where if you're a grower of cotton specifically, I know that's going to be on your forefront of your mind is nematodes. Okay, there's other crops that obviously nematodes impact, and we'll go over a few of those things just in a second. But I just wanted to kind of do a little rundown on what's going on nematodes. And I know I said cotton, so you might be thinking, whoa, is this the row by row? But nematodes affect other things too. They don't just affect cotton, but cotton is obviously one that we do look at this time of year to kind of start sampling. Sean Butler, if you're listening, this is for you because, man, me and you have talked so many times about nematodes. So I just kind of want to go over a few basic principles for nematodes. The first and foremost, just like a soil sampling is super important. How you sample is super important, and that could lead to different results. It might give us a misinterpretation of what's actually in your field, or yard, or orchard, whatever the case may be. So when you're taking a nematode sample, it's the same thing as a soil sample. You're going to go into a zigzag pattern in an area. Depends on where you're at. If you're in a field, there's actually a certain pattern you would go with a field versus a yard or a golf course. If you want a really good visual, you can actually go to UGA's guide for interpreting nematode results. And there's some really good pictures to kind of show you exactly what the pattern looks like. But it's essentially the same thing as like a soil sample in a lot of cases, just kind of that zigzag pattern. The reason we do that is we want it representative, right? So you want to make sure you're getting a good snapshot of the area you're doing. You don't want to now when you take a sample, and I know it's easy to do this because if you're in the field and you're like, oh yeah, I need to get this, do not let that sample just sit and get hot or dry. Okay. That will actually kill the nematodes in the sample. And for this to actually work, you're going to have live nematodes, of course, right? And then the killing of those nematodes obviously will cause a false detection for those nematodes that are actually present. Now, when it comes to actually interpreting those results, it's a little different. But before we get to that, I want to talk about when you should sample. So we know how to sample. When should you, right? Timing is super duper important. Just like with soil samples, timing is important as well to make sure that you're prepared for the next year. And when we're looking at cotton, and I brought up cotton already, and that's because October, November is a really good window for us to take a snapshot of what's going on for nematodes in our fields. Okay. And, over the past few years, I've done nematode research, nematode variety research, and nematode varieties sometimes get a bad rep. for yield lag, yield drags, or they're just not performing as good as other varieties. But I'll tell you, nematode varieties have a place, and they do really, really well in those scenarios, no matter what, right? And sometimes adding one to your rotation isn't a bad idea either. But we'll get to that in just a second. For cotton, you go 8 inches, and really most of these crops that you would be testing nematodes for, you're going to do about 8 inches for everything except turf grass. Okay, so when you're doing that 8 inches for cotton, you're looking at lance, reniform, and root knot. For peaches and fruit trees, the best time to sample is your February to April window, and then also September to October. Again, you're about 8 inches down, and you're looking for root knots for that nematode, for the common nematodes that affect those. For peanuts, root knots, another the same nematode that affects peanuts. That's your September to October window, 8 inches again. Soybeans, September to November, so we get a little bit extended window there. And you're looking for lance, reniform, root knot, and cyst. Tobacco, you're looking for nematodes in about July window, and that's going to be your root knots. Warm season turf grass, June to August. This is 6 inches down, and you're looking at lance, reniform, root knot, sting for those. Cool season, September to October, and you're about 6 inches again, same nematodes as the warm season. And then vegetables, we're looking at that window about August to September. Again, you're going back to that 8 inches in depth, and we're looking at root knots for those. Now, in many times for when you're handling the soil samples for nematodes, handling it is super duper important. Like I told you, poor estimation could lead to a misinterpretation of the thresholds, which could lead to a different management strategy instead of the one that you might have wanted to use. You want to make sure you label the bag that you bring in. Make sure it's labeled correctly with the date, the location it's at, and then you can put your grower information on there, but or your name and either email or phone number if you want to on the bag. But we're going to handle that at the office anyway. But just put it into a Ziploc bag will be fine. And then you can bring them up to our or your local county extension office. And I've been getting this question before about, can we drop off samples in the county we don't live in? Yes, you can. You can take it to any of our offices. We'll handle it the same way, whichever is the easiest and most convenient for you to get to. And that's totally fine. Typically, Savannah, what's your price for nematode samples in your office?
$12 a sample plus shipping.
Yep, that's ours too. I just want to get an idea of if it's pretty uniform. So like I said, $12 can save you a lot of money in the long run. Even if you're just a homeowner and have a lawn, there's a lot of times nematodes can cause problems there. You'll start to see a lot of issues around your edges of your yard or edges of areas, like creating almost like a border, whether that's stunted growth or kind of dying out a little bit. With turf grass, it's a little bit finicky because there's usually a few things going on at the same time. So typically, in my experience, I've seen shallow root systems equal more of a nematode pressure being seen on the grass as well as disease pressure. So a lot of times it goes back to fertility though. So when you're taking a nematode sample, definitely go ahead and get a soil sample too. We can run both of those at the same time. Go ahead and get them both, get your results so we can figure out what we need to do. Now, going back to what I like to talk about is the cotton side of things, of course. And for cotton, there's a few things we got to remember. I mentioned about the nematode resistant varieties, and we have those. We also have nematicides out there, and y'all already know about all this stuff. AgLogic is one of them. These are what a lot of growers use. Will be an AgLogic in a lot of scenarios, especially on sandier soil around our area. Root knots are pretty prevalent. So AgLogic is pretty common, or some sort of a nematicide. But don't shy away from those nematode resistant varieties. Delta Pine's got some good ones. Phytogen, Stoneville. These and I'm sorry if I'm missing a variety in some of the other companies as well, but these are really good. They have really good technology with them, and they do a good purpose. Even if you might experience some sort of yield drag for whatever reason for that season, that nematode variety is going to help you in the long term because it really does kind of break up that cycle for nematode pressure in that field. Kind of like what Bahia grass and peanuts in a peanut rotation would do, or like some sort of grass like that that kind of breaks up the nematode cycle. Same thing happens with those nematode resistant varieties. So don't count it out just because it's a nematode resistant variety. I've been really impressed with some of the new technology and new varieties that are coming out from all these companies. I think there's a lot of they're kind of beating the stigma, so to speak, on these. But there's also a few other things that you could do to help with it. Crop rotation is really, really important when it comes to this. It minimizes the problems with nematodes and soil-borne diseases. Planting date and temperature, soil moisture, all that has to goes together. Scouting fields early for detection, timely application of fungicides for management of diseases and things like that. Use appropriate nematicides. And the choice of variety, of course, is also another big thing. The way you can tell, and if you've never seen nematodes in a field of cotton anyway, you're going to see kind of a rolling pattern in the field. You'll have some tall cotton, and then it'll go short, and then it'll go tall. With us, it's really easy to kind of see some root knot. If you pull up the plants, root knots are just like their name. They're going to have a knot on the root system, and it's pretty self-explanatory what you're looking at. Cotton does not have nodes on the bottom of the roots, so I mean, if you see some nodes, then you might have some problems. But that's kind of like a snapshot of nematode pressure and what you can kind of look at. If you're cotton specifically, take a look at our cotton production guide. Reach out to your seed reps or your county extension agent to kind of look at what varieties are available and what we've seen in some past studies with them. But like I said, don't knock them until you try them. I promise you the new technology out there is doing really, really cool things. And we're seeing some really good yields on a good bit of these varieties. So,
Blake, I do want to add some caution to those varieties.
Yep.
Under no circumstance should you just go plant a nematode variety because you think you might have nematodes.
Bingo.
We need to be sampling so that we know what kind of nematodes, what species are out
Yep.
there, because a lot of these varieties are one or the other. They're not, they may be reniform and root knot,
Yep.
or they may be reniform or root knot.
Yep.
And so we want to make sure that we're making the right decision before we go in and plant a nematode variety.
Yeah, that's an excellent comment. I failed to mention that. That is very, very true. And like I said, extension agents, your seed reps, they can kind of walk you through which varieties are going to be the best suited for your area. But to do that, we're going to need to know what's out there. So definitely sample. If there's anything you're going to take away, no matter if it's a commercial setting or your yard, I like to have a nematode sample and a soil sample going just to kind of see what we got. If you're in Effingham County, I don't know about as much in a manual, but I know in our case, we are sandy as I'll get out, and we have nematodes in almost every field and every yard. I mean, we have nematodes. So I know, Savannah, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm sure that you're very similar in a manual as well.
Yeah, we've got some severe situations in some places. But another thing that Blake did point out for nematodes is cover crops. And so we have a special guest with us here today. We've got Seth McAllister from Terrell County. He's going to join us with some information about planting cover crops specifically for our row crop producers. And honestly, I think he is doing an excellent job being a county extension agent on the southwest corner of Georgia. We're excited to have him with us today. And today we're going to talk a little bit about row crops with Seth. Now, Seth, you're on the conservation tillage team too, right?
Yeah, I'm on the board for the Georgia Conservation Tillage Alliance. It's a pretty good organization. We're trying to get that back off the ground. It's kind of been inactive for the last few years, but we're getting back at it.
Good. So one of the questions as county agents we start getting this time of year pretty heavily is going to be some of our cover crop options. Most of our guys are getting their peanuts in. They have started defoliating cotton heavily and picking some in some places. And so they're really going to be transitioning into the cover crop side of things. And so Seth, tell us a little bit about the benefits to planting cover crops for our row crops that we'll start planting in the fall. I'm sorry, in the spring.
Absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, historically, cover crops have been utilized mostly for erosion prevention. If you've got land that's got some slope and change of topography, that's probably your most immediate benefit that you'll see. Where we've had conventionally tilled fields, obviously, there's been a lot of erosion in some of those. But as you get a little bit deeper into the cover crop spectrum, you can see a little bit more aid with weed suppression, increased fertility on that cash crop following it. Some of our mixed producers are using some of that cover crop as winter grazing for their livestock. I think that's a underutilized potential, as well as irrigation management and, of course, the soil health benefit from that increased organic matter.
Good. Are there any challenges to planting cover crops for our producers?
The biggest one I see right off the bat is just the timing of it. I mean, obviously in the fall, everybody's busy harvesting their cash crops. Obviously, peanut harvest is very time consuming, as well as, it's the priority as far as when those peanuts are ready. You don't have a um, very forgiving schedule to get them out of the ground and harvested when they're ready. And then cotton is likewise our priority. Generally speaking, in South Georgia, we need to have our cover crops planted between October 1st and November 14th. If you get much later than that, you can still get some erosion prevention, but as far as the delayed you're going to have the following spring, by then we're losing a lot of sunlight every day. And as we get closer to that middle of December, especially, they really don't have time to come out of the ground and get growing before it gets really cold. So I tell people that generally the later you are in the fall planting, the later you're going to be in the spring before you can kill it.
Okay. What about now, is that going to differ when you talk about cold tolerance, is that going to differ in some of the species that you may pick if you are getting a little later?
Absolutely. So if you're wanting to consider any of the brassicas, whether it be a turnip or a rape or a canola or a forage collard or any of them, they are probably the most forgiving on heat tolerance. So if you've got a cornfield that you've harvested in July or August, that may be the potential where you could try one of those brassicas and get it growing and established pretty easily. Once you get past the middle of October, I don't recommend planting any of the brassicas. One, their maturity differs a lot from some of our other cool season annuals, but they just don't take the cold as well, and they're more easily frost killed by really cold weather. Likewise, oats can be a little bit more cold sensitive, so I like having them planted a little bit earlier. Rye and wheat, as far as the small grain goes, as well as triticale, are probably some of our more cold tolerant winter grasses. And then the legumes, whether it be clover or lupin or hairy vetch, any of them really needed to be planted by the end of October to get the most bang for the buck out of that seed cost. Those are lower seed rates on the legumes, but the seed cost per pound is a lot more expensive. So if you're looking at including them in your winter cover crop selection, if you don't get them planted by, I would say, the first week of November, you're probably not going to get enough growth out of those to pay for the cost you have in that seed cost.
Good deal. So you talked a lot about species and how they change with cold tolerance, but are there specific species that you recommend for something like our cotton and peanuts over others, or is it a situation by situation basis?
I'll give you the typical county agent response to that is it depends, obviously. But what I like to tell folks is, I think historically we've looked at all of our cover crops as if you compare it to a truck analogy, you walk to a dealership and you say, "Hey, I want to buy a Chevy truck." Well, if you talk about winter cover crops and you just say, "Hey, I want to plant rye," that's essentially saying you're planting a Chevy truck. But there's a lot of options even within each individual species as far as cultivar or subspecies, and the maturity ranges can vary very different in each one of those categories. So for example, Florida 401 is a cultivar of rye, of cereal rye. It matures much earlier, probably 3.5 to 4 weeks before the standard Renza Bruzi rye that we normally see here in our environment. Um, as far as looking at a head of cotton, um, I generally tell folks that you need to figure out what your end goal is before you determine what route you want to go. So if you're only looking at wanting to get some erosion prevention, I'd say find whatever you can find cheap and do a low seeding rate so that you get some ground cover. But you have to remember that we've got to get an established cash crop up following these winter covers. So generally speaking, the most bang for your buck is going to be the more organic matter you can generate out of these cover crops. You want to plant them as early as you can in the fall to stand, and then terminate them as late as you can once they're mature in the spring. So in a cotton situation, I would be looking at planting between the second week of October and the second week of November. I would want to get that winter cover crop established. And then the goal, if you're going into cotton the following spring, I would want to terminate somewhere around the last of March or the first of April when those cereal grains are starting to flower and they have active pollen coming off at antithesis. Um, if you have allergies like me, you'll know when it's ready because you'll be sneezing when you walk through it. But as far as the benefit from those covers, that's when they've generated the most biomass that they're gonna collect, and they haven't devoted their nutrient value into seed production. So you've got a lot of organic matter on top of the ground. They haven't started pulling nitrogen and those other nutrients into the seeds. And if you kill them then, you need about 3 weeks of allowing those to desiccate and get nice and crispy before you strip till in them and plant your cash crop. I tell folks we can strip till into cover crops green, or we can strip till into them dead. But the biggest no-no is to kill them today and come back in 5 to 10 days and try to strip into it, because that half dead stubble is like a wet rope, and it is almost impossible to try to get those coulters and shanks through on a strip till rig. If you want to cuss like you've never cussed before, that is probably the optimal way to do it.
For sure. All right, Seth, we certainly appreciate you being on Tilling It Like It Is. Just one final question. Do you have any more words of wisdom for our producers in regard to cover crops or anything for that matter going forward into this kind of off season, but kind of not off season? So we always say, it'll slow down, and I don't think it ever slows down. We just have to keep farming on. So, any more words of wisdom in regard to cover crops going forward?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, we're all stretched thin on time and on priorities, but at the end of the day, I mean, if this becomes something that's important to you, then you can prioritize. I mean, if we're going to plant a corn crop, we know around March the 15th to April 1st, we're going to be in the field planting corn, if the weather permits, obviously. I think that we have to have that same mentality for our cover crops. If you're going to designate those funds and those efforts, then it costs you the same amount of money to plant it, whether you're doing it on time or whether you're doing it late. So if we can, take the initiative to get it in the ground, to give it a good head start and get it up and established, then I think that investment is going to pay you dividends the following year, whether it be for erosion or increased fertility or, better soil health or whatever your goal is. I would say that, kind of looking forward to the future, I think that we're going to see paramount implications from whether or not we take the proactive measure of using some cover crops. I think between the increased litigation in our court systems, we're going to be forced to look at some alternative measures for herbicide stewardship or, reducing our water footprint on growing the crops that we have. I've seen in some literature that for every 0.1% of organic matter in our soil, we can increase our water holding capacity by an inch. So, obviously, if we're looking at our 1% organic matter in our really sandy soils, normally it's even less than that. But, if we could get to 1.5% organic matter, I think that, using heavy biomass cover crops, that's a realistic goal. Even in our peanut rotation where we're disturbing that soil. I think we can get to 1.5% organic matter if we're diligent and if we're timely. And that could be, monumental impact on especially the sandy fields that have low organic matter that really don't have a lot of soil buffering capacity when it comes to pH. I think that we could look at reducing lime, reducing some of these nutrient inputs. I mean, that fertilizer is expensive to get out there, and it's just further driving our pH down when we're using synthetic fertilizer every year. So I think that this is a long-term project. And if you plan on farming for the next 10 or 15 years, I think cover crops could be a really good investment into your farm portfolio for the future.
Perfect. Thank you, Seth.
Glad to have it.
Now that we've heard from Seth, and I love hearing from Seth. Seth is one of my favorite people to talk to. He's a wealth of knowledge. I'll tell you that much. Now we have another special guest. All right. And she's been here every episode. All right. But we're bringing her on as a special edition guest this time. So I'm going to swing it over to Savannah Tanner and let her take it away with some of the winter, forage and cover crops.
So I joke with people around Emmanuel County and in the state to say that I don't necessarily have a lot of cattle producers in Emmanuel County. I have row crop producers that have cows. And I would argue that is a large component of agriculture in Emmanuel County is row crop producers with cows. Now we do have cattle producers. I don't digress that. But one of my favorite topics from a livestock standpoint, and if you've heard me speak on winter grazing and feeding cows through the winter and things, you'll know that I'm very passionate in saying that if we are not planting winter grazing, which from Seth's standpoint can also dual purpose as a cover crop for our row crop producers. But if you're not planting winter grazing, you are doing yourself one of the biggest disservices as a cattle producer that you can, assuming that you have the land and assuming that we get the proper weather to grow those winter forages. But I'm very passionate in that of it makes more sense to plant them than it does to feed hay or have to supplement poor quality hay. Now we've got a few options for winter grazing. Obviously, your most common are going to be your small grains and your ryegrass, so rye, oats, wheat. Triticale is one that we kind of heard about it back 10 or 15 years ago. We kind of hadn't heard about it, and it's starting to pick back up. Ryegrass is one, and then certainly clovers and brassicas. Now, on my personal farm, I like a three-way split. We do rye, oats, and ryegrass, and what that does is that's going to increase the amount, not necessarily increase the amount of forage that we have, but it is going to prolong the amount of time we have to graze that forage. So rye is going to be an early maturing variety. We're going to get some good growth in that in late November into December. Then following that, our oats are going to start coming up. We're going to get some grazing from that. And then, further into March and April, we're going to get some of our ryegrass grazing. Now, I do want to point out that if we are planting a split crop, does not if one's going to be a high yielding grass and one's not quite as high yielding, doesn't mean that we're going to yield that high yielding grass across our acreages. It's going to kind of hit it in the middle. So I do want to caution you in when we're talking about yields in winter grazing, that a mix, if your entire purpose is getting yield for a hay cutting or something of that nature, then a mix may not work out for you. But I do think that any of the ones that I mentioned specifically, your rye, oats, wheat, triticale, and ryegrass, all have a good purpose, and your county agent can sit down and work with you on what may work better for you. The biggest thing I can think of when we talk about those is going to be oats. I do want to point out that the last 2 years here in Emmanuel County, our oats have gotten hit pretty hard in some of the colder weather. They have a pretty poor cold tolerance. So I do caution you in planting oats alone. But those are some good options for you. I certainly recommend adding some clovers in. You can get 50 to 75 units of nitrogen just by adding those into a mixture and overseeding those into your pastures. Brassicas are also an option. Cattle have to be trained to graze those, and they're not going to give you a prolonged grazing period. It's kind of one of those things you're just going to graze 3 or 4 or 5 days and then kind of be done with it. Where brassicas work well is in a drought prone condition. A drought, if we go through a drought, you'll see that those do well. The other thing I like about brassicas is a lot of times they have a long taproot, and so if you've got a place that's real compacted on you, they can actually go in and break some of that compaction out.
Hey, Savannah, you mentioned about training them. What do you have any tips on the best way to do that?
You have to make them hungry. You have to pretty much make them eat it. So pull them off of grazing all the way through for, a couple days and just feed hay and then offer them. Now, my experience, the couple years that we planted brassicas on our particular field, is that those brassicas will, essentially the sugars will hit at a specific time, and then they love them. And so sometimes it's just a matter of the growth process of those brassicas. Now, I do want to caution you. We always want to pull up the Georgia Forage's website or blog post about selecting specific varieties from the statewide variety trial. You're only going to get as good as you plant. So make sure that you are selecting varieties that are going to work in your area. The fun thing about the state variety trial from UGA is that we have these trials in multiple locations, and you can find the location that's closest to you, but then you can also look at the statewide research. I also do want to put a plug in for our row crop guys. We've got a lot of guys that either grow cover crops or even some of them grow it just for seed for winter grazing themselves. I want to encourage you to talk to your county agents because they may have a row crop producer that is actually going to have oats or rye or wheat or triticale that you can actually purchase directly from the farmer. Now, I caution you, sometimes we've got some germination concerns with that, but we could always send off a germination test and find out what our seeding rates would need to be to do that. But I do want to recommend that you guys talk to your county agents about potentially finding some local sources of those seeds Here I know that Emmanuel Peanut and Grain actually cleans and bags those for our farmers. And so you know, a lot of the farmers are selling those directly. Certainly don't want to take away from tested and proven seed from a lot of the seed companies. But those are your options as far as purchasing seed for winter grazing. Now, one thing, I'm a statistics girl, but I don't like numbers, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But I just want to give you an idea of what you're going to be paying per head of animal per day based on what you're feeding in the winter. And so if you are feeding ryegrass to a lactating mama cow, if you have ryegrass grazing, and you've got your mamas on there, they've got calves on their side, you're looking at $1.71 a head per day. Now, if you've got hay, I've not seen a lot of great hay samples this year. We have really struggled in all aspects of farming this year in the state, but you know, our hay producers, forage producers certainly are no strangers to that struggle. So haven't seen great hay. So if we are feeding hay and grain because we're having to supplement because we're feeding poor quality hay, you're looking at $2.35 per head per day. When you start multiplying that over 50, 60, 80, 100 head of cows, the difference between that $1.71 a day for ryegrass versus that $2.35 versus hay and a supplementation product of some sort. In this situation, it was grain. You know, you're looking at pretty close to 65 cents per head per day. And again, when you start multiplying that out, you were better off to plant that winter grazing. Now, it is currently October the 23rd. It has been since Hurricane Helene, since we've gotten a rain here. That rain run off and it ran out real quick. So it's pretty dry. The good thing about winter grazing is we have a little bit longer time frame than we do with our row crops to plant it. So essentially we can plant our winter grazing from the first to middle part of October here in the southeast portion of Georgia. Let me clarify that. If you're in North Georgia, those are going to change for you a little bit. But essentially first part of October on into the end of November, middle of December. So we've got some time. We're not in panic mode yet when it comes to planting winter grazing. Now, I had a question the other day about planting it. Should we go ahead and plant it even though we don't have moisture in the soil? And because we have wiggle room, because we're not in dire straits of getting it in the ground right this minute, I recommend hold off, wait till we've either got an excellent chance of rain, or it has already rained for you. So we don't want that seed to sit there and rot. The other thing is, for instance, if you were planting oats and you've already bought them and they're already in the bag, and let's say we're not able to get in and plant them, we could essentially feed those oats at that point directly to the cow versus planting them. So we've got better management decisions that we can make if we do not have that seed in the ground. So hold off, wait on that rain, or wait on that chance of rain to get those in there. But I just want to emphasize how important it is to plant winter grazing. When it comes to fertilizing, things like that, usually about 50 pounds at planting and then another 50 in late winter before spring growth is really going to help us get that forage up and going. I do want to caution you with that. Just like with our Bermuda grass, you don't want to get nitrate toxicity for your cattle. So make sure that there's going to be a rain of some sort, a large rain event, about at least a half an inch before we, while we're getting that out there before we graze it. Now I can speak on winter forages for hours and hours and hours, just because I enjoy it. I'm passionate about it, and I wholeheartely believe that if you're not planting it, you're doing yourself a disservice as a cattle producer. That being said, we're going to close out. If you have questions about it, I certainly don't mind answering them. You can get our contact information on our blog, Tilling It Like It Is, or our Facebook page. But your county agents are great too. So any of the county agents would be able to assist you on any questions that you have in regards to nematodes, in regard to plant and cover crops, or even winter grazing. Blake, anything else?
No, I think you covered pretty well. Again, I just want to emphasize multi-species is a good thing too. Like Savannah said, she did a three-way mix. Mixes are good. And check with your local row croppers. I know there's several out there that, just like Savannah said, that are growing this for seed, for whether they're doing their own winter grazing or if they're going to sell some. So just get with your local agent, like Savannah said. I can't emphasize that enough. So, Savannah, you want to hit us with what's coming up?
So we don't have a lot coming up, which is kind of a good thing because sometimes it's nice to take a break after October. October is always crazy, and you throw hurricanes in there, and it gets even a little crazier. But a couple things we've got. It is officially time to apply for Farmer of the Year, the Farmer of the Year award. Your county agent can help you get the application drawn up and written up for that. So if you're interested, make sure you contact them. There is a Serve Safe training for restaurant owners and food business people in Burke County on November the 18th. The Farm Bureau Conference is in Jekyll, December the 8th through the 10th. If you guys are not a member of Farm Bureau has really worked hard with Hurricane Helene and trying to assist our producers in any way they can. Definitely recommend meeting with your Farm Bureau people about potentially joining. I think in Emmanuel County it's only $25 a year to be a Farm Bureau member, so think about that. January 9th through the 11th is the Southeastern Fruit and Vegetable Conference. Pretty sure that registration is open for that. That's always a good one to go to. I enjoy that one. And then one thing we do have coming up, dates are not set in stone, but make sure that you're watching our Facebook page and blog for any upcoming events that we may miss or that comes about after we publish specific events. But we've got some timber updates in regard to Hurricane Helene that are going to be coming out in December. We're still nailing down some of the information on that, but we'll have those posted and have those in the next episode as well.
Well, thank you, Savannah. Before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you to Seth for joining us. It's a pleasure to have somebody from the Southwest District come in and speak to us over here. Again, I just can't express how wise Seth is. He's a great agent. And Savannah, of course, for sharing her wisdom as always on the cattle side. One quick thing about the next episode. So to get ready for the Georgia-Florida game, we're going to have a special edition with MC Holbrook from Glenn and, well, McIntosh and Glenn, I guess, County. And she'll be kind of talking to us a little bit about some water quality and ponds and things like that. I'll also be covering a few things on the pond side of things, but we're also going to focus a little bit on alligators. So it's going to be a good episode. I think it's going to be fitting for what we're going to be going into as the Georgia-Florida weekend gets kicked off. So look for that episode next week. And as always, keep telling it like it is. Till next time, thank you. Still some good in this world. He said that Hag was a poet for the common man. Got him through his tour in Vietnam. He was the first dance to a brown-eyed girl, and there was still some good.